Welcome, everyone. I am Jean-Claude Ramirez, and I'm the managing partner of South America for Bain & Company, a global strategy consulting firm. I'm delighted to be here moderating a panel with so many distinguished speakers on a topic that is so crucial and timely as this one. In the last decade, we have seen a growing demand and expectation on the side of consumers, of investors, of employees, of entrepreneurs, and society at large for an upgrade of our economic system and the creation of a more socially and environmentally responsible private sector that is aligned with their values and the need of the planet. This demand has given rise to two major trends at the global and regional level. On one hand, we are seeing traditional enterprises moving towards more ambitious and transformative ways of practicing social and environmental responsibility. These enterprises have realized that purpose oftentimes motivates people more than money. This is particularly true of younger demographics. When you move towards purpose, employees are happier, are more productive, companies have better recruitment and retention rates, consumers are more loyal, and performance increases overall. Let me back this up with some data. A recent study by Bain & Company showed that an engaged employee is 45% more productive than a satisfied one. But an inspired employee can be 2.5 times more productive than the satisfied one. And our research also shows that 70% of employees care more about working for a company that follows sustainable business practices than 3 years ago. The other global trend that we are witnessing is the emergence of new and hybrid entities, referred to as fourth sector organizations, which lie at the intersection of traditional three sectors, the government, the private sector, and the non-for-profits. These four sector organizations come in a wide variety of forms. I guess the most common one is called B corporations. You also have social and sustainable enterprises, and so on. But they all share a common DNA that combines profit with social environmental impact, while seeking to reduce negative externalities to a minimum. In 2015, almost 200 member countries of the United Nations unanimously adopted 17 sustainable developmental goals to encourage economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection across the globe. These goals are wide-ranging and aspirational, covering developmental issues related to clean water, sanitation, responsible consumption and production, decent work, economic growth, quality education, and so on. And companies can leverage these 17 goals to improve their effectiveness of their sustainability strategies or their business purpose strategies. However, and I think this is what we'll be discussing, many have found it challenging to apply proper focus and clarity to these aspirational goals. Our research shows that only 4% succeed and almost 50% fail. So in this session, we have a unique opportunity to get insights into what is necessary to provoke the shift and the successful adoption of more socially and environmentally responsible practices by enterprises in order for them to become leaders in leading with purpose. So to address this issue, we have today a wonderful set of panelists. We have Paul Bulcke, the chairman of Nestlé. Mr. Bulcke joined Nestlé in 1979, became its CEO in 2008, and since 2017, he's the chairman of the board. Something you may not know about him is that he has held various positions in Latin America throughout his long career at Nestlé. We were just speaking Spanish just recently, right? To my right, I have Esteban Bullrich. He's an Argentinian senator for the province of Buenos Aires. Before being elected to senator, Mr. Bullrich was the Minister of Education in Argentina. He started his political career in 2003, running for the Recrear party, and is today part of President Macri's Cambiemos alliance. Gonzalo Muñoz, across from me, is the co-founder and CEO of TriCiclos. Mr. Muñoz is a World Economic Forum social entrepreneur, and TriCiclos, a fourth sector enterprise, the largest recycling stations operator and its first certified B company. Congratulations. And then to my left, I have Karina Saade. She's the Chief Operating Officer for Latin America and Iberia of BlackRock. BlackRock is the world's largest independent manager with $6.3 trillion in assets under management globally, of which 160 billion are under management here in Latin America. And finally, we have Luiza Trajano. She's chairman of the board of Magazine Luiza. Magazine Luiza is one of Brazil's largest retailers with more than 800 stores. Ms. Trajano also leads something that's called Mulheres do Brasil, which is a movement aimed at increasing the inclusion of women in business and government leadership. So thank you all for being here. We'll have an open conversation of about 30 minutes that I will kick off with a specific question for each of you to set the stage. Then we'll have, hopefully, a little bit of back and forth between us, time for some Q&A session with the audience, and then I'll give you the final remarks for each of you to see what you got out of this session. So the first question goes to you, Mr. Bulcke. Could you share with us what is Nestlé doing to increasingly transform itself into an enterprise that operates responsibly by supporting society and the planet, and thus imbuing its employees with a sense of purpose?
The way you formulate the question is actually already a statement, in the sense that you say, how are we going to transform to behave like we were not behaving before? I would translate that a little bit differently, saying we're living in a society where we talk more about purpose. It has to be more explicit. There is much more societal dimensions into it. But at the end of the day, and I go back not only Nestlé, but economical activity in society. We're a 150 years old company, and actually we started with one product that has saved the life of a child, and so you speak about societal purpose. Well, let's start it there. And when a company or whenever factor of economic activity is well inspired for a decent purpose and is framed with strong values, what it does should be positive force in society. It's not something like before companies were bad, but now that we are shaping and framing and pressuring them to behave. Because at the end of the day, and you say, what do we do to have the purpose more explicit in Nestlé? It is somewhere re-articulating something that we always had, which is we're all about enhancing quality of life through nutrition and being part, contributing to a healthier future. That's how we re-articulated our strategic direction. That's the what we want to be, and that's why we wake up in the morning. That's why we motivate 340,000 people, etc. You go on, and there's nothing to do there of saying, hey, and then you have to do something to correct that. It should be intrinsic in the new strategy of trying to be part of society, and we are. And actually what you do with purpose and frame that then with values, that's how we call it. We say we are driven by purpose and guided by values. And our values are very simple, and they never change. The world is changing, culture is changing, everything is changing. Two things don't change: the purpose of a company and the values. The purpose, I mentioned it, that's what drives us, guides us, glues us together. But then the values are linked with respect. Very simple. It is rooted in respect. Respect for yourself first, because that's where you create your responsibility, transparency, authenticity. Respect for the other, which is a relationship, the ingredient of trust relationships. Quality is linked with that, quality in relationships, and you go on. Also, respect for diversity. We are a very diverse company. We have operations in almost every country in the world. We have 100 nationalities in our headquarters alone, so it's a little bit natural to us to really respect that. And that respect the future, and that's where sustainability, next generations, and long-term thinking comes in. Mm-hmm. Long-term thinking. And I don't feel that is something that is well served. So you say, how do we make that so explicit in your own company? It is by being true to yourself, being explicit. That's the job of a CEO, the job of a chairman, is to make sure that these two things are very clear and non-negotiable. The strategic direction that is translated into a purpose that motivates the people, and then the values. And actually the what and the how, the social responsibility, we call that creating shared value. Creating shared value is linked with what I mentioned before. A company cannot be successful over time if it doesn't link up with society positively, and all it does. And that is not after 7, that is not by writing a check at the end of the year. This is 24 hours, 7, 52 weeks. And that should be encrusted into the mindset of your people. It's linked with purpose. Remember that I said part of our purpose is enhancing quality of life, but also contributing to a healthier future. So you have the what, you have the how, and you start then to really complete the purpose when you say, and the why. And when you have these 3 well-defined, very explicitly understood by your people, I think that's where you start to really be part of a society in a positive way. That's where we want to be. We're a human company. We are a high tree. We catch a lot of wind. But look, the criticism we're always going to have, we engage in that discussion.
Thank you. Ms. Saade, your chairman and CEO, Larry Fink, recently made a call for action for companies that until now have been too focused on quarterly results to adopt a sense of purpose. He also stated that BlackRock, given its substantial influence as an investor, recognizes its responsibility to drive that change. So how do you think that companies should navigate between a spectrum that on one end has maximizing financial benefits, and in the other end of the spectrum, it has maximizing social benefit?
First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. We would argue at BlackRock that value maximization and societal purpose are not mutually exclusive. We have a strong conviction that companies that are able to directly and honestly articulate a sense of purpose, which we believe is a long-term vision that accounts for the needs of various stakeholders, those companies are the ones that are the most successful in the long term. And we are a large investor in many companies around the globe. We invest in 15,000 companies in 90 markets. And our research suggests that companies that have a clearly defined sense of purpose have a clear competitive advantage in the long term. And so what's important here is that longer term horizon. I think Jean-Claude did a very good job articulating how that competitive advantage manifests itself in the labor market, right? Companies that have a clear sense of purpose, they're more effective at attracting talent. They're more effective at motivating talent, because companies that have a purpose and employees embrace that purpose and they identify with that purpose, they're more likely to go the extra mile. But I would argue that companies that have a very clearly defined sense of purpose, they're also better able to align management's interests and shareholders' interests. And that's because when management has a long-term vision, they understand what that long-term vision is, they're going to be more focused on executing that long-term strategy rather than paying attention to short-term noise, right? Which is this reference we're making around short-term financial results. And ultimately, the consistent execution of that strategy and consistency in results is more important for value creation than just short-term financial delivery. So performance is not just about hitting one quarter's worth of results. It's about the consistency of those results. And a management team that has a long-term vision, a long-term purpose in mind, is more effective at doing that. Where do we think that competitive advantage doesn't play out? I think it's not sufficient just to have a sense of purpose. What's important is to execute that purpose locally. So a purpose doesn't change. A purpose should be globally articulated, but the execution has to have local relevance. It's about making an impact in local communities, and that's how employees, that's how management can actually identify with that purpose. So the local execution is critical in order for this competitive advantage to really be sustained. So what I would want to argue here is there's no conflict in our view between value maximization and purpose. We are ultimately investors and we're focused on maximizing value. That's our core area of expertise. But what we want is for that value to be maximized and sustained in the long term, and for that purpose is essential.
Thank you. Mr. Muñoz, you're a pioneer in South America in certifying TriCiclos as a B company. What can you tell us regarding what companies must do, on the one hand, to create this burning platform of the need of impact, and on the other hand, to land this vision into concrete tasks and practical metrics that will help employees know what to do every day?
Thanks, Jean-Claude, for the question, and thanks to the WEF for putting this topic into the agenda. I think it's totally relevant, meaning also the group of people. And I must say that Karina just mentioned something that is extremely relevant in terms of the final objective. If people are not getting paid for generating social and environmental impact, everything else is poetry. I mean, it might sound fantastic, it might happen sometimes, but the reality is people will do what they're most of the times paid to do. So when it comes to generating a company or shifting from one focus to amplifying it, the main way to do it is, of course, measuring it. You will not measure, I mean, you will not be able to reward people if you don't measure. We say that things that are measured doesn't exist. So first you have to develop or use the correct KPIs in order to understand how that real impact really exists. So what happens there is that first we have too many and too relevant short-term incentives. Second, people running companies had been trained not to consider negative social and environmental externalities, but maximizing shareholder profits. So we need to change that culture. We need to move from a unidimensional economy to a multidimensional economy, speaking of the role of society and companies. And there's nothing more relevant that I know actually in the world to measure the impact than the B impact assessment. The way the B Corps are measured is one very pragmatic tool. It's online. It will allow you to identify what's the value that is generated by your business model, your social impacts, environmental impact, your treatment, your practice with the employees, with providers. So that will allow you to understand the whole impact of the company. But again, that also might be relevant to identify how's your picture. It's just the initial part of a path that will take you to become a better company. So through that, you will be learning how to manage that. It's not only, again, about measuring, it's all about managing it. And you will manage it if it's in the bylaws. If not, again, it might happen one time, it might depend on one person who was in the head of that company at that moment, but when you put that into the bylaws of the company, if you start paying your people through the achievement that they have through social and environmental impact, and the whole company has a culture where these things matter, as I really believe, as Paul said, that's how most of the companies were created. They were created to generate value. Somewhen we missed the track, and we must urgently recover that position, because the risk of not doing it is too high, not only for companies, but for the whole society. And finally, if you do that, and if you focus that management tool and that culture with the SDGs, that will allow not only for your shareholders and your immediate stakeholders to gain the maximum value from the company, but the whole world will gain from the development and the performance of that specific company.
Okay. Senator Bullrich. I guess you're going
Esteban.
to... Esteban, okay. I think you know what's coming your way, which will be something to do with government, right? I know there's a bill making its way through Argentina's Congress called Ley BIC. And if passed, this capital markets law would provide certain incentives for profit B corporations that are certified as pursuing social and environmental goals, right? Could you explain to us a little bit better, what this law is about, which I think is the first attempt in South America to pass something like this, and why is it important to President Macri's administration?
First, because we set a goal. President Macri has been very public on he wanting his government to be measured by how he reduced poverty in Argentina. We started the government with more than 30% poverty, and we are slowly reducing it. And I think we are slowly reducing it because to really reduce poverty and get over it, you need the participation not of the government, you need the participation of the whole of society. And as Gonzalo was saying, I think business has a lot to do with it. The idea of the law was basically to create a framework where there were incentives, as you said, to have other measurements for businesses' success, not only profits, but as Karina was saying, long-term views, taking some of the short-term incentives Gonzalo was talking about that drive the management to look at that short-term profit and not looking at the long-term sustainability of the business. But also we want to take advantage of Argentinian resources, right? We believe that a country like ours has a potential due to the fact of the strong resources, natural resources we have to sustain them. And so we want to make sure that there is an incentive to also take care of our natural resources and the sustainability of our development throughout different generations. So this is the idea that is driven behind the law and that hopefully, as you say, it's going to pass in Congress. But I wanted to add another dimension that I think is important. Paul was talking about the idea that purpose has been the same for many, many years. And I truly think that in some cases that should be reviewed. I'm not going to talk about Nestlé in particular, but I think in general, the world today needs for a different collaboration between companies too, and governments and companies in facing these social goals. Poverty, hunger, the idea of a sustainable environment and global warming, all of those need not only the commitment of governments, but also the commitment of every single citizen of a country, of a society. In that sense, I think we need to keep on promoting this idea of a broader purpose and a more collective purpose. I understand that companies might have their own purpose, but that purpose should be aligned with a collective purpose of a society. And therefore, and I think the idea behind these big companies is that have a more collective purpose that drives everyone in society, not only companies.
Well, I think we can come back later to that point, which is what we're talking about, the intersection, right, of the three spheres, right? Ms. Trajano, you are known throughout Brazil as an incredibly inspirational leader with a very strong sense of purpose. And maybe one of the questions we could ask you is, throughout your career at Magazine Luiza, was there a moment, when was the moment that you made the shift towards business purposes and why?
Magazine Luiza is over 60 years now, and we say that what changed is that we always change. Now, our purpose and principles have never changed, which are honesty, transparency, and truth. We started a long time ago. I am a single daughter. When I started, my aunt had money to help me just to pay a couple of bills, but she had a great purpose. She did not mean to make a lot of money. She wanted to create jobs, and that was a true difference in our company. When I was 12, I used to ask, why do some companies grow and people are still so sad, unfortunate inside these companies? Why do some companies grow and some companies don't? So this has always been something I wondered. Now, the most important moment in my life, I used to say that after we have kids, the most important moment is when we have a baby. Now, professionally speaking, Magazine Luiza was the very first company, the first retail company in the world that won the Best Place to Work award back in 2013. Now, when people cannot find a job or can't do other things in life, they will become a salesperson in retail shops, right? We have stores in more than 600 different spots, so it's all about working with communication, the way we align our purpose, and therefore we have an ongoing challenge. We were the very first retailers to receive the Best Place to Work award. We now count on 22,000 indirect employees, 22,000 direct employees and more than 40,000 indirect employees. I'm in love with my country. Magazine in Luiza, we sing the national anthem every Monday morning. We have Luiza television channel. And you know, people keep on talking about education. And over the past 15 years, what we did was to make every single employee become an entrepreneur. They will make money based on their sales. In the past, they used to make the same wage regardless of their sales, and now that has changed. And we changed this back in 1995. We want to value those people who actually produce, who actually help us have more profit. And we know that 60% of the Brazilian population make up to 2,000 real a month. In the northeastern part of the country, people lack water. So we at Magazine Luiza provide people with scholarships that range from 20 to 90%. And this is not meant to be a retention process. We have already helped more than 8,000 people. It's just one of the seeds we plant. And in Mulheres do Brasil program, we're fighting to provide education to everyone. Women usually leave their homes at 5 a.m., they come back at 10 p.m., and they have to do their housework. 15 years ago, then what we did is that all employees who had children up to 11 years old would receive an extra benefit, so they can pay someone to watch their kids. In terms of healthcare, the Brazilian healthcare system, SUS, is a wonderful system we have in place. Usually, men in the family, they have healthcare aid. Now, women, to be able to grow in the company, what we had to do was to help their husbands so that women would have the possibility of also growing professionally. So we do have to help society as a whole. What our employees say is that we even help them in terms of religion. We need to have a clear mission, and this mission needs to be stated in our attitudes. When it comes to transparency, for instance, managers have to communicate to their employees clearly. And when they go to court and they sue the company, we have to go there and tell them what happened clearly. And over the past 20 years, we've been one of the best companies to work. Now, Katarina, it's not easy to answer your question. When it comes to investors, we need to create profit, of course. And we have to change this culture. Culture we have as of today is that we have to be profitable no matter what. Now, if we think about the company's sustainability, things have to change. And if we do not have a purpose, companies won't last. And that's why family-owned companies and governance are two hot topics as of today. So I would say that I don't have one specific moment when I shifted my mindset. I have always thought about what I had to share with everyone. And I can tell you that each and everyone in my company is proud of what they do. And you see, my family has never asked me why my stocks are at 4 real, or they never congratulated me because stocks now cost 90 real. And the challenge my son will have, the challenge these new generations are going to have, is to be back to the first place in the market, since we are now in the 4th position. Aside from all the awards that we received last year, my son's been doing great things. He actually gave a 200 real gift card to all employees as a way of showing gratitude to them. I mean, they're making a lot of money, so they can do a lot. I did not make money at their age, and I had to do so much. So we've come a long way, and Marcelo knows of that. Young people today, they know that if they do not care for their country, for the social aspects, then we won't be able I mean, we can accept having more than 60% of our population making 2,000 real a month. And I can contribute with my country by providing people with jobs.
Okay.
So I wanted to pick up on you want to comment?
I want to pick up too something.
Yeah, okay, please.
First of all, I love your muito passão. A lot of on purpose. Again, a philosophical thing now, but somewhere purpose is to be re-articulated, is to get different wordings depending on the times you live in. We re-articulated our purpose because also the people, younger people, they reacting on other words. The action plans that are resulting from the purpose change. Society has changed. The awareness of societal issues linked with activities, etc., is getting different flavors, colors, intensities. So companies have to be very sensitive to that and adapt and react. But I do fundamentally believe that the fundamental purpose, the why we as in a company exist, didn't change. When we say we want to be enhancing quality of life, well, that has changed because we get much more insights of how nutrients and nutrition helps, and it's part of healthy lifestyles, and there is pushback on certain things that we have to react and adapt and put some research and all that. But the purpose per se, I don't think so. I really think that if a purpose on a higher level is well defined, and the values are well defined. If I say the values of our company are defined like respect for, etc., I don't see that change. Our culture is changing as a company. It is changing, and the activities and how we engage and how we are much more explicit engaging in society has changed. Before that was less part of society. Everybody in the corner, in each respective corner. That integration, multi-stakeholder dimension, engagement, that is changing. Purpose? I don't think so. But it's a little bit philosophical.
No, I know, and maybe it's not useful to get into the philosophical discussion. But I would put much more emphasis on leadership. And you mentioned that. You mentioned the fact that you as a leader had to lead also that purpose. And I think there are examples of businesses that having a purpose were destroyed by bad leadership. So my point today is basically this idea of a collective purpose. You might have a company purpose that maybe didn't change. That's why I don't want to talk about one company in particular. Right, but now there's a social purpose that I think there needs to be much more sensibility from businesses and leadership towards that social purpose. And that social purpose has become more global too, because it went from a state, from a town, to a state, to a country, and now even beyond the borders of the continent. So that's what I want to bring on the table, because I see the need, and now I'm talking more about Argentina, which is the arena I know the most. But I see the need for that commitment in a different way, the need for a different way of dealing with that probably same purpose, but with different ways, and that might change the ways, the values, not the values per se, but the values that you put ahead of them and the order you use them. So that's what I mean to say. I think there is a collective need today that has to be attained.
Can I add something to that as well? I think the other thing that has changed is that previously we had certain scope of knowledge. So you might have a great purpose that is totally focused, that was totally focused in your clients or customers. But you might be missing out your internal impact. So I've seen in the past many companies that have this purpose that is totally focusing on what am I going to give to my clients or customers, but I'm missing out every single impact with my employees or with the environment. So now we understand that the focus of the company, the role of the company is not only related to the client, the customer, the specific value chain, but it includes much more and many other stakeholders that were not included in the past.
Yeah, I think for purpose to contribute to consistency of long-term results, it has to withstand the test of time. So in my view, purpose should be lasting. It should be a long-term vision, but there is a collective angle to it, to your point, Esteban. So, and the manifestation of that, while the purpose won't change over a certain time horizon, the manifestation of that purpose will change depending on what societal need it's catering to. So I'll give an example about BlackRock. Our purpose is to build better financial futures. We think one of the largest challenges in the world today is to help individuals be financially secure, knowing that they're going to be living longer lives. So helping them prepare for retirement, for example. The execution of our purpose varies greatly depending on what market we're in. In Mexico, it may mean that we're working with regulators to build a retirement system that accommodates longevity. In Argentina, it may mean we're working with market participants to stabilize local capital markets and to restore confidence. So that manifestation is very different, but the purpose has been the same ever since the inception of the company, and it's one of the reasons why it has kept people focused on the long-term vision and led to consistency of execution.
But at the end of the day, the whole discussion is short-term, long-term again. This tension between short-term, long-term. And I do all feel, and we're all in the web here, and we all agree, and we all discuss the same thing. And we walk out there, and we're getting pressure from all angles on short-term. And that's true, too. To the long-term, you have to survive the short-term first. And that's a little bit the challenge we have. That's leadership then coming in and saying, look, we're going to have, and you have to serve the short-term, too, because you have to have a short-term intensity in doing things efficiently, et cetera, et cetera. But you need leadership with vision and purpose in the broader context, to say, and we're going to do it a way that serves society in the broader context. Because long-term is only there if you link up with society positively. You cannot smart your way into the future. You cannot do it on the back of something. But that's leadership and vision. And I think that part of the webs and all, and the discussion we have, is to maintain that vision. And that's leadership then too, to go above that. It's not easy though, let's face it. I've been CEO of a company and all, and hey, and also all financial institutions and all that, they have a short-term dimension. Their whole structure, because at the end of the day, whenever you go -2, there's panic in the financial world. We don't panic because we try to look through that, but you see, and that's a little bit, we have to be very frank and honest in these discussions, because, and somewhere, what's nice about what you do, for example, we are a private company, classical, 150 years, et cetera, we embrace more explicitly this engaging into the broader societal discussions. And this should not be PR, that should be because you really believe, it's by conviction, not convenience. You start from the other angle, and you have a societal thing that you want to serve. But you say also, if I want to survive, it cannot only by good intentions. It should be economically viable. Economically viable does not mean profit maximization. It is to financially survive so that you can pay people to live up to their dreams and in your organization. Somewhere there's convergence.
There is.
Call it the B point or something.
It is. And I don't know if it's
and it's exactly the same. The only thing we really have in common is that we share a more societal overarching purpose in society, and we do it and say, what can we do from our angle to do that? We can execute, you know. We have executional possibilities. We can leverage our scale, and you can do it negative or positive. Let's do it positive. And you're right too. One doesn't go against the other. If you do it the right way, for example, waste reduction, you waste, but first of all, I should not produce as much waste. So actually, I should starve you. Business model, but
you won't. I will have to evolve.
But waste makes sense. If I reduce waste, it's cost reduction to a certain extent. And if you think it through in perspective of time, all societal engagement do have an economical meaning, because economical activity is getting a decent output. That's purpose. It should be a decent thing. The purpose should be positive. And do it in such a way that you use minimum resources. That's economical activity.
Absolutely.
So at the end of the day, there's no contradiction whatsoever.
Not at all.
If you frame it well, and if you look beyond the horizon of the short-termism that we have in our society, you're not going to talk it away. Human beings are always spiraling back to short-term. Better one bird in your hand today than 10 flying over maybe tomorrow. That's human behavior. You need energy to keep that perspective of time.
The challenge.
One thing.
Eu acho muito difícil falar em propósito a longo prazo.
It's difficult to talk about long-term purpose. Purpose is here and now. It's everyday examples that can be shared. There's no way you can talk about long-term purpose. The purpose is done at every single moment by helping people, being responsible, providing jobs, bringing profits to the company. And I have a mission now. It's to get two things for corporate leaders. First of all, to undertake human resource purpose campaigns, because they separate delivery to human resources. They don't assume it. If they don't assume, for instance, violence against women, if they're not the first ones to stop that, that's not going to happen in their company. So I agree, he has to be the first. It's more difficult for men than for women. And I can only speak about economics and this and that. I cannot talk about purpose. Now it's the buzzword. If you don't talk about purpose, your company is not going to be any good. So you have to learn to talk about purpose. And it's difficult for a CEO to do that. And the second thing is, like you said, the company has to assume the country as a country mission. If the country doesn't do well, we don't do well either. So you have to undertake the country. So are we going to take 100 years to reach 20% of women on the boards? Not even the granddaughters of everybody here are going to be there. And this is not going to happen if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't help. So a corporate CEO has to undertake the existing programs, but really to their heart. Otherwise, it won't move on. And they have to also undertake the country. I understand what you're saying, and supporting this law that is going to help profits. It's going to be good. I hope it takes off here in Brazil. It's going to go faster.
So hearing, right, is that we have companies with long-standing purposes like Nestlé in enhancing people's life. We have Magazine Luiza with the purpose of creating jobs, right? We have BlackRock with providing financial future, better futures for people. But one of the things that I heard, and I think it was raised by Esteban and by you, is that in order to reach that purpose, its full potential, today more than ever, we need to work also in coordination, in collaboration with government, and with society, right? I mean, it's not enough.
Não tem jeito de separar.
Right? It's not enough for Magazine Luiza to want to create jobs, if the government, whose duty is probably to provide education and stuff like that, is not doing that. It'll be difficult even for a giant corporation to be able to make up, right, for the lack.
And the other way around also, Jean-Claude, because democracy is not voting every 2 years,
Yeah.
Democracy is government of the people. And we tend to think that we voted and then we forget until the next election, and we leave the guys, they're going to do it. The senators are going to vote, the executive branch is going to execute and whatever. And we're not looking at good results, at least in Argentina, in Latin America. I mean, corruption has been there, honesty has not been there. So we need to rework, and I think participation is important. And that's where I think there has been a separation. And so that's one main goal that I think we need to have as an environment, and not a business environment or a government environment, an environment, country environment, regional environment, global environment. There's one environment where we need to work together. And the second thing is, we need to bring this up, if you look at the inequity or inequality in the world, definitely we have there a huge gap that we need to solve too. And there we need to work together, but clearly, the top 1% is getting richer and richer, and it's getting further and further away from the lower 1%. So there is an inequality that I think has to do with a wrong sense of collective purpose, where we need to work. And I honestly think that has to be a common work, a collective work.
So there's one thing that I want to pick up here, and you mentioned that too, that, well, sometimes the private sector has then to compensate for no. You can hardly ask from the private sector, because government fails, that we have to replace government. I mean, what we have to do is engage in the discussion and obliging the multiple partners and parts of society to play their role. What we have to do is, though, living up to the same principles everywhere in the world on treating the people, quality in the factories, treating our that is our job to do. And that, but starting to say, look, we're going to compensate education. we're not made for that. We can help. We can induce. We can engage in discussion. I feel it's a dangerous path to start walking if you would say, look, at the end of the day, long-term thinking is more in companies than in politics, because 4 years I have to be revoted. Well, wait. We should engage with you to discuss these things. But I do feel government should play their role, and they should play their role and stick to their role only, which is framing. I always say government should do the framing, and the private sector and all other parts of society should do the painting. Problem starts with they want to do the painting. But anyhow, that's another discussion. But it's for us to maintain.
Or you want to increase the framing.
Well, yeah, but you understand what I'm saying.
You too.
It is that dynamics that I feel is the engagement that you mentioned, that we live in a society of more multi-stakeholder, same-time engagement on broader issues and defining who can play what. And it is clear, and it's so positive that you see NGOs, civil society in general, government, more open to engage with the private sector. The private sector was seen like how that was a profit-going snitches of society. I'm sorry, that's not what we are. And so with the openness now to engage and involve, I would say the execution, operational potential of the private sector into that societal discussion and issues is fantastic. But don't ask from private sector to compensate for failures of the other parts, because then you start to have a very dangerous dimension. Then I would say that then the purpose of companies starts to really change where it shouldn't.
Okay, I wanted to maybe, have some time to engage the audience. Maybe we can get a couple questions for them, and then we can wrap it up. So if you can raise your hand and wait until you have the mic.
There's one over there.
Right. Well, let's go. Let's start there. And before you talk, just identify yourself, please. All right.
My name is Susana Padua. I'm a social entrepreneur of the Schwab, Ashoka, and so forth. And I work with the environment. One of the questions is, if you think of the whole chain of production, like a company like Nestlé has a huge influence in the whole production. So I think one of the responsibilities or purposes would be to be really responsible and influence the correct way of doing things, so that when in the end you deliver the products, they are of excellent quality, not questionable or more or less. They are really nutritional and everything is correct.
Well, thank you for the comment, and I feel you're totally right. We should not hide and say we're only responsible for what happens in between our walls. We are part of society. That's how I started. And our supply chains, they go upstream very deeply into the farming and agriculture dimensions, the milk districts we have, and that's why we have a supplier code that is very explicit. And it's very complex, and sometimes certain things happen somewhere upstream that you didn't observe, and then we should not put our head in the sand. Then we should engage with NGOs and going and see how we get better dimensions upstream too, and have the same treatment we want to treat our people with that is happening there, because that is part of my product afterwards. And when there is something that is not okay, my product is not okay. Yet at the same time, it is a complex issue. And so you have to engage with multi-stakeholders in doing that. We're not going to change the world in one day. At the end of the day, we only fractions of supply chains. For example, here in Brazil, we have coffee. We're quite important in coffee, quite sizable. Yet we have only a part of the whole supply chain. So many others are taking from that same supply chain. So we have to engage even with other players. So it is complex, but we don't hide. And it is sometimes very challenging.
Okay. There was a question here. One last quick question, and then thank you.
Hi, I'm Marcela Torres. I'm the CEO and founder of a social enterprise based in Mexico. We work with migrants and refugees in terms of social justice, but also producing technology. And one of the biggest challenges we face is that we're consistently, Mexico doesn't have a legislation or a financial instruments or anything like that for, let's say, B Corps or social enterprises. So we basically have to pay taxes and work as business as usual. Should there be a different type of legislation or taxation process for companies that have a very different way of doing things, as opposed to business as usual. Because our goal is not to produce revenue. Our goal is to achieve social equality and change the dynamics in migration, let's say.
Yeah.
So Mexico doesn't have it, and we as a startup, we suffer a lot from that.
Yeah.
So should there be?
Okay.
Should we push for it?
Who wants to take this?
I can take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've been.
The main idea behind the big legislation that in other places is the benefit corporate legislation, it's all about showing that actually there are many companies around the world looking for creating that impact, and they get mixed. Sometimes they are perceived as NGOs, or sometimes there are NGOs that want to trade in the market or want to work with the tools of the market. But most of the times it's about how do we reward that impact that companies or organizations are creating that are public values, that are many times assets for the whole society. I would say there are two things. One, if we pass that legislation, that will allow governments to develop some promotional tools that will help those companies increase their impact and grow. But also it will enlighten those companies for the financial sector. I can speak on my behalf. I've raised capital 4 times, and big funds in the world, they are looking for companies like mine and putting money, working not towards only the financial reward, but also the social impact and environmental impact. They are asking me to report on a monthly basis, not only being profitable, but also generating that social environmental impact that in your case would be working with refugees. They will not only look for that reward in terms of financial, but also really, really empowering you and your team to generate that additional impact. And that conversation generates a new ecosystem for the whole society to speak in another way. So for example, in Chile, let me explain, we have this initiative called 3 by I, meaning inspiring us, including us, and innovating us. It creates a platform between the big companies aggregated in the big Chamber of Commerce, the CPC, then the entrepreneurs, the NGOs, the innovating centers from the universities, all of us working together to what the public sector can bring to the room that can be not only rewarded again by the public sector and the financial sector, but also can be recognized by the government as something that is good for everybody. Those type of legislation have already passed in more than 35 states, and it's been discussed not only here in Brazil and Argentina, also in Chile, Colombia, Australia, UK. So in many countries you'll find that discussion taking place because it's needed, that those types of actions are not only philanthropic actions, but are actions that has to be rewarded by the whole society.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time, so I thought each of you would say a short word about what you found most insightful. But let's maybe Karina just tell us in 2 minutes.
Sure.
what.
I think what I found most insightful is, if I could summarize my biggest takeaway, I think our collective challenge is twofold. It's to create the right long-term incentives for societal purpose to emerge, but also to institutionalize them so they can withstand the test of time and transcend beyond just an individual leader and ultimately be sustainable in the longer term. So that institutionalization is critical, and I think that's where, if the private sector and the public sector are not aligned, that doesn't become possible.
Well, thank you all for such a lively discussion.
Thank you.
I think
Thank
we've
you.
finished just in time. Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.